Usually when you decide to put a security guard inside a building, it is because there is a threat coming from the outside.
Right, yeah.
You assume the problem is external.
Yeah.
You want to protect what is inside the walls from being breached.
Exactly. It is a basic defensive posture. I mean, you are securing the perimeter. It is the logic behind pretty much every locked door and alarm system in the world.
But imagine a scenario where you put a security guard inside a building, not to protect it from the outside, but because the foundational structure of the building itself is just fundamentally collapsing.
Oh, wow.
The walls are giving way, the floorboards are rotting out right from underneath you, and instead of fixing the architecture or, pouring a new foundation, you just hire a guy in a high-vis jacket to stand in the hallway and watch it all fall apart.
That is a brilliant and frankly, terrifying image for what we are looking at today. It perfectly captures the institutional paralysis we are seeing across the board.
Well, welcome to this deep dive on the Morning Roundup. Every single day, we have a very specific mission here. We take the day's massive stack of incoming information articles, deep dive research, obscure corporate manifestos, sociological data, videos, and we extract the critical insights. We thread them all together to find the hidden themes that are actively shaping the world you live in.
And today, you are going to need to clear your schedule and buckle up because the stack of material we have in front of us is incredibly wide-ranging.
It is massive.
Yeah, we are looking at everything from Princeton University radically changing its 133-year-old exam policies to the rise of AI generating celebrated literature, and even corporate CEOs just overnight firing their entire HR departments.
Right.
Plus, we are looking at right-wing economic schisms in Britain, massive geopolitical demographic shifts warping the internet, doctrinal changes at the Vatican, elite Hollywood rituals.
And believe it or not, the moral trajectory of Gollum in The Lord of the Rings.
I know, it sounds like we just threw darts at a board of random topics.
It really does. But if you actually look at the underlying mechanics of all these sources, there is a very clear, very stark thread running through every single one of them.
Yeah.
We are witnessing a profound global crisis of human agency and meaning. Humanity is actively, and sometimes willingly, outsourcing its judgment to megasystems.
We are totally handing over the keys.
Yeah.
Whether that megasystem is artificial intelligence or, the borderless global market, massive corporate behemoths, or algorithm-driven bot networks, the result is the same.
Completely.
The traditional pillars of Western civilization, our education, our legal rights, our culture, our theology, they are either completely buckling under the pressure or being radically redefined to serve the machine rather than the human.
And before we really get into the weeds here, I want to set the table. We are pulling from a massive stack today that spans the absolute extremes of the political spectrum.
Right. Very important to note.
We have hard-left critiques of corporate power sitting right next to highly controversial right-wing manifestos on economics and culture. We aren't here to pick sides or tell you who is right.
No, not at all.
Our job is just to lay all these puzzle pieces on the table, impartially, so you can see the whole picture and decide exactly how you feel about it.
Exactly. We are looking at the architecture of the arguments, not endorsing them.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I want to start with that security guard metaphor, because it perfectly maps onto our first piece of evidence regarding the abdication of human judgment.
Yeah, the Princeton situation.
Right. Let's look at Princeton University. Starting July 1st, Princeton is officially ending a 133-year-old tradition. For over a century, their students took unproctored exams.
Just completely alone in the room?
Yeah, it was an honor system. You
Yeah.
signed a pledge, the professor left the room, and you took the test. Now, an instructor will be in the room watching them.
And if you just casually read the headline, you would immediately assume, oh, obviously kids are using AI on their phones to cheat, so the university administration finally cracked down to stop them.
That is exactly what I assumed.
Right. But the internal surveys reveal a detail that completely flips that narrative on its head. It was the students who asked to be watched.
Wait, really?
Yes. The student government surveyed the undergraduates, and the majority actually favored bringing the proctors back.
The people being watched asked for the surveillance. Why on earth would you volunteer to have someone breathe down your neck during a calculus final?
Because the entire social architecture of enforcement has completely inverted. Think about how cheating used to work in a physical environment.
It was super obvious.
Right, it was highly visible. You had cheat sheets hidden in your sleeve. You whispered to the kid next to you. You physically craned your neck to look at someone else's paper. It was visible, and crucially, it was socially costly to commit.
Yeah, if you got caught by your peers, you were ostracized. It was a violation of the community trust.
But with AI, that visibility is entirely gone. A student glancing at a smartphone hidden under a desk looks exactly like a student checking the time or, just staring blankly into space while thinking.
Right. Or if the exam is on a laptop, they just seamlessly flip to another browser window or use a split-screen tool.
Yeah.
You can't visually distinguish deep thought from algorithmic cheating anymore.
Exactly. Cheating became invisible. But here's the real crisis, the mechanism that actually broke the honor code. While cheating became invisible, reporting it became incredibly socially costly.
Oh, because of the backlash.
Yes. Princeton's own honor committee noted a massive, pervasive fear of doxing and social media shaming among the student body.
So if I see you cheating and I turn you in, I am not viewed as a defender of academic integrity. I'm viewed as a snitch, and you and your friends are going to ruin my life on Yik Yak or TikTok.
Precisely. Students were terrified that if they reported a peer for an invisible crime, the accused would turn around and destroy them digitally. Gen Z fears digital exile far more than they fear academic failure. So the peer-to-peer policing system became entirely impossible to operate. The students asked for the surveillance back because they literally couldn't police themselves anymore. They needed an external authority to take the burden of judgment off their shoulders.
This is exactly what I mean by the security guard in the collapsing building. The university's response to the invention of AI, which is arguably the most disruptive knowledge tool in human history, was to just stick a human observer in a room to watch students take a 19th century style test.
It is the definition of institutional paralysis. We are still operating on an educational model built for a world of knowledge scarcity.
Right.
Think about it. In the 19th and 20th centuries, if you needed to know about the chemical structure of benzene or the dates of the Treaty of Westphalia, you had to memorize it. Books were relatively scarce, accessing a library took time, and knowledge was not immediately at your fingertips.
So testing your ability to recall information from memory was a perfectly reasonable, functional proxy for whether you would actually learn the material.
But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in the era of what some of these tech raiders call the infinite book.
The infinite book, I like that.
Information is universally accessible instantly to everyone all the time. I have the entirety of human knowledge in my pocket.
Which means the skill that actually matters in the modern economy is not whether you can store and reproduce information like a human hard drive. The skill is, do you know what information exists?
Exactly. Do you know when to reach for it? Do you know how to prompt the system to get it? And critically, when the machine spits out an answer, can you evaluate the quality and accuracy of the information you get back?
I love the analogy one of these researchers used. Think about how we teach math, specifically a calculator.
Oh, the calculator analogy is great.
When you're 7 years old, you go to school and you learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide on paper. You learn the foundational mechanics of arithmetic, so you understand what the numbers are actually doing. But eventually, when you get to advanced physics or calculus, the teacher lets you use a TI-84 calculator for the heavy computation. Why?
Because as you advance, the skill being tested isn't the raw arithmetic itself. The test isn't, can you do long division for 20 minutes?
Yeah, nobody cares about that at that level.
Right. The test is, do you know which calculation to run to solve this engineering problem and when to run it? The calculator is just a tool to execute the judgment of the human operator.
Exactly. Education right now should be asking, how do we redesign our assessments to test human judgment rather than machine recall? If the infinite book is always open, the exam has to test your judgment.
But institutions like Princeton are completely refusing to adapt the actual assessment. They are trying to forcefully preserve the 19th century testing format by fighting the 21st century environment.
You're demanding students pretend the calculator doesn't exist.
And when you start forcing people to operate like that, when you outsource the actual heavy lifting of judgment to the machine but pretend you aren't, you don't just lose academic integrity, you start losing the essence of human creativity itself.
This is where it gets incredibly bizarre. If you look at the literary world right now, this abdication of judgment is actively bleeding into art.
It really is.
There's a massive, highly documented influx of AI-generated literature that isn't just tricking people, it is actually being praised and elevated by the literary establishment.
Yes, there is a piece in our stack highlighting a very specific and frankly surreal example. It involves an AI-generated author persona named Zongi.
Zungi.
Right. This isn't a human. It is an algorithm generating text based on prompts. And the line that was actively celebrated by human critics reads, "She had the kind of walking that made benches become men."
She had the kind of walking that made benches become men. I mean,
It is crazy.
if you turn your brain completely off and just absorb the rhythm of the words, it sounds vaguely profound. But if you actually think about it for 3 seconds, it is absolute nonsense. It is literal AI slop.
It is an algorithmic hallucination posing as poetry, but parts of the literary establishment eat it up.
Why, though?
Well, the analysis we are looking at argues this isn't just an accident. It is indicative of a massive structural and demographic shift within the publishing industry itself that has fundamentally altered what is considered good.
Right, let's look at the data provided by the critics here. They cite demographic surveys showing that publishing, reviewing, and literary agency staff are now overwhelmingly homogenous. Specifically, reported to be 72.5% progressive white women.
Now, to be clear, the argument here isn't just about gender. It is about homogenization of perspective. The critics claim that the industry has violently swung.
Okay, how so?
Well, decades ago, it was overly male-dominated, which had its own massive, obvious drawbacks. Entire genres and perspectives were ignored, and it was heavily biased toward a very specific type of stoic, often cynical literature.
Right.
But the argument is that swinging entirely to the opposite extreme, to a completely female-dominated monoculture, has created a new set of blind spots that no one in the industry is willing to admit.
The specific critique is that this demographic shift has resulted in a hyperfixation on vibes. It has created a culture obsessed with what they call light and fluffy book-tuck aesthetics.
Exactly.
It is about how the book makes you feel, rather than whether it challenges your fundamental worldview.
They point to things like the British Book Awards, which have literally rebranded themselves as the Nibbies.
The nibbies.
Yeah. Think about that infantilization of language. The source argues that instead of a milieu of serious literary luminaries and heavyweights pushing the absolute boundaries of the human condition, wrestling with darkness, tragedy, and complex morality, the industry is increasingly run by people who want literature to feel like a cozy, safe, curated aesthetic.
It is the literary equivalent of a weighted blanket.
Exactly. And when you prioritize a comfortable vibe over deep, challenging, structurally sound human truth, the gatekeepers lose their ability to judge actual quality.
So AI slop about benches turning into men can easily slide right past them, because it sounds like the kind of quirky light poetry they've been trained to reward.
Right. It fixed the aesthetic of profundity without requiring the grueling human labor of actual philosophical insight.
So what does this all mean for the future of human thought? If AI can do the baseline technical work of writing code and legal briefs, and AI can also write the cozy, vibe-based books that win awards, how do we defend the necessity of human intellect at all?
It is a massive question.
There is a fascinating conversation in our material today between the cultural commentators Ross Douthat and Jennifer Frey about exactly this, the role of the humanities in an AI world. And they point out a massive fatal trap that people fall into when trying to defend liberal arts.
This is a crucial distinction. The most common argument you hear today from tech CEOs, politicians, and university deans is essentially an economic one.
Right, the soft skills argument.
Exactly. They say, well, because AI is taking over the hard coding and the technical tasks, we need the humanities more than ever for soft skills in the workforce. They argue that reading Shakespeare makes you a more empathetic middle manager, or that studying ethics makes you a better HR director.
And Frey completely rips that argument apart. That is exactly the wrong case to make.
It is a profound philosophical mistake because it entirely instrumentalizes the humanities. It reduces the cultivation of the human soul to mere workforce training.
Yeah, if your ultimate argument is that reading Plato is just a tool to get a 10% raise at a corporate job or to manage an Excel spreadsheet better, you have already surrendered to the logic of the machine.
You have admitted that economic output is the only valid metric of human worth.
This is where the history gets really wild. Let's dig into the actual historical concept of leisure. When you or I hear the word leisure today, we think of sitting on a couch, cracking open a beer, and mindlessly scrolling TikTok.
Just totally shutting our brains off.
Right. But that is the exact opposite of the classical definition.
Right. The ancient Greeks had a concept called paideia, and later the Germans developed a very similar concept called Bildung. It is the core idea of liberal education.
And we use that word liberal not in the modern political sense, but in the classical sense, right?
Yeah.
Liberating, freeing.
Yes. It is the education required for a free citizen, as opposed to the vocational training required for a slave or a drone. And amazingly, the Greek root word for school skole actually translates directly to leisure.
Wait, school literally means leisure.
Yes. Aristotle specifically argued that we work in order to have leisure, but he emphatically did not mean idleness or mindless amusement.
So what did he mean?
He meant a space specifically set aside, fiercely protected from the demands of basic survival, economics, and commerce, to cultivate the highest prides of humanity. It is the time you use to ask the teleological questions. What are we actually for? What is the ultimate goal of a good human life?
And what is amazing is that this wasn't just some abstract luxury reserved for rich elites in togas. If you look at the 19th and 20th centuries, this was deeply understood by the working class.
Oh, absolutely.
Historical data shows how the British working class formed massive reading groups to study the classics. Or look at Frederick Douglass in the United States. He was enslaved. He learned to read by secretly trading bread to poor white boys on the streets of Baltimore in exchange for reading lessons.
And the book he read wasn't a manual on how to be a more efficient worker.
No, it was the Columbian Orator. He read Cicero and speeches on liberty. He used the liberal arts to truly, fundamentally liberate his mind before he ever liberated his body. He did not do it to get a promotion. He did it to achieve spiritual and intellectual freedom.
That is such a powerful example.
But wait, I have to stop you right there, because I can hear the objection forming. And one of our sources brings this exact counter-argument up. Does reading great literature actually make you a good person?
It is a fair question.
Because history strongly suggests it doesn't. Look at Weimar Germany in the 1920s and 30s. It was arguably one of the most cultured, highly educated, philosophically engaged, deeply literate societies in human history.
They were completely steeped in Bildung.
Exactly. They read Goethe, they listened to Beethoven, they debated Schopenhauer, and yet that exact society descended directly and enthusiastically into Nazism.
Yes, that is undeniable.
Or look closer to home. In the early 20th century, the horrific ideology of eugenics wasn't a fringe back-alley idea. It was championed by the most highly educated classical scholars at Oxford, Harvard, and Yale. So if the humanities are supposed to be this magical shield that saves our humanity, why did the most highly educated people champion some of the worst atrocities in human history?
It is the most vital pushback you can make, and it completely destroys the naive view of education. Frey's response to this clarifies the absolute limitation of what education can actually do.
Okay, what is her response?
She explains that education requires the ineliminable element of human free will. Education is not an algorithm. You cannot input Shakespeare and output moral citizen.
It is not a software update.
Exactly. You can expose a student to the transcendentals. You can show them truth, beauty, and goodness in the highest forms of art and philosophy. But the actual learning, the moral formation, requires a voluntary act of assent from the student.
The student has to choose it.
They have to choose to align their will with the good. The humanities do not guarantee you will be a good person. A highly educated person can just become a highly sophisticated monster.
But they do guarantee you remain a person.
That is the crux of it. The humanities keep the moral battleground alive. If you outsource your thinking to machines, you aren't just making a bad moral choice, you are outsourcing your humanity entirely.
Right.
You abdicate the capacity to even ask what is good. You become just a bundle of biological desires dictated to you by an algorithm that just wants to maximize your engagement time.
Which brings us to a terrifying physical reality. We talk about the cloud and AI and algorithms like they're this invisible magic floating in the ether. But the mega machine has a massive, brutal physical footprint, and it is aggressively encroaching on human spaces to feed itself.
It needs so much energy.
When you demand an AI that can write your literature, generate high-definition video, and replace human workers, you need immense, staggering amounts of computational power.
And computational power requires data centers. Massive, sprawling physical structures packed with servers that consume mind-boggling amounts of electricity and water.
Let's look at exactly how this is playing out in the real world. There is a situation currently unfolding in Coweta County, Georgia, that feels entirely dystopian.
Yeah, the Ainsley Brown story.
Right. A 27-year-old woman named Ainsley Brown has been posting videos documenting what is happening to her neighborhood. There's a $17 billion data center project slated to be built on 800 acres in her county.
800 acres?
To put that in perspective, this single data center is projected to draw more power than a standard nuclear reactor. And to make way for the massive high-voltage transmission lines required to feed this beast, Georgia Power is seizing people's land right over their childhood homes.
We are talking about homeowners who have lived on that land for generations being legally forced to surrender their property, and they do not have a choice because the government and the utility companies are using the power of eminent domain.
Let's really dig into eminent domain, because understanding the history of this legal mechanism is critical to understanding how we have slowly lost our agency over the last century. Where did the government get the right to take your house?
Eminent domain originally derives from antiquity, specifically from monarchical rights. It was the feudal idea that the king ultimately owns everything in the realm, and he can take back whatever he wants, whenever he wants, for the glory of the crown.
Right.
But in the Western legal tradition, that absolute tyrannical power began to be limited. Starting with the Magna Carta, the concept evolved to recognize that the public actually has inherent rights against the crown.
And in the United States, that protection was officially enshrined in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. It states very clearly that the government cannot deprive you of your property without just compensation, and critically, it has to be for a public use.
That phrase, public use, is the entire battleground.
How so?
Originally, that meant something the public literally used. The government could force you to sell your farm, but only if they were building a public highway, a railroad, a post office, or a military base to defend the country. If the public fundamentally needed it, the individual had to yield, but they got paid fairly.
However, the legal scholarship we're looking at points to specific, disastrous turning points that deeply eroded this protection. The first major blow actually happened way back in 1837 in a New York case called Bloodgood versus Mohawk and Hudson.
That is a critical case.
In that case, the courts decided that a private railroad corporation could use the government's violent power of eminent domain to seize private land.
The court's logic was that because the railroad would benefit the public by improving transportation and commerce, the private company was acting in the public interest.
I mean, you can see the seductive logic there. A young, expansive nation needed railroads to grow, and you couldn't have one stubborn farmer blocking the transcontinental railroad.
Exactly, but philosophically, it crossed a terrifying line. It allowed a private, for-profit entity to wield the coercive power of the state against private citizens.
And that logic incubated for over a century until it culminated in the final nail in the coffin, a 2005 Supreme Court case called Kelo versus New London.
Oh, this case is just infuriating.
It really is. Suzette Kelo had a little pink house in New London, Connecticut. It wasn't blighted, it wasn't falling apart, it was a perfectly good home. But the massive pharmaceutical corporation Pfizer wanted to build a massive new facility nearby, and the city wanted to redevelop the waterfront to complement it and bring in higher tax revenues.
So the city used eminent domain to seize Suzette Kelo's house, along with her neighbors' homes, and handed the land over to a private developer.
Just took it.
Yeah. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, the court ruled against the homeowners. They legally redefined public use to mean public purpose or economic development.
They essentially said that because a luxury condo or a corporate headquarters will generate higher property taxes for the city than a working-class home, tearing down your house to build a corporation's vanity project is a valid public use.
It is crazy.
And the darkest irony of the Kelo case. Pfizer eventually abandoned the project. They left.
Yeah.
Today, the land where Suzette Kelo's home stood is a barren, empty lot filled with feral cats. They destroyed a neighborhood for nothing.
But the legal precedent remained. So now, flash forward to today. If a mega corporation wants to build a $17 billion data center to train their AI models, they don't have to negotiate fairly with homeowners.
Right.
They just convince the local politicians that the data center is good for the local economy. You know, it will bring in tax dollars. And the government acts as their private muscle to clear out the citizens under the guise of economic development.
It is a complete inversion of power. The state is no longer protecting the citizen from the corporation. It is acting as the enforcer for the corporation against the citizen. And our material offers a fascinating, almost tragic contrast to this.
You mean the nail houses?
Yes. They point out what happens when a purely private developer, without the weapon of government backing, wants to build something.
Yeah.
In a true free market, You actually have the right to say no, and you get to set your price.
Yeah, the architectural anomalies known as nail houses or holdout houses. They are incredibly visual representations of stubborn human agency.
I love seeing pictures of these.
You see these photos out of China, and there's a very famous one in Seattle, the Edith Macefield house. She was an elderly woman who absolutely refused to sell her tiny little home to commercial developers, even when they offered her $1 million.
Wow.
And because the developers couldn't get the government to use eminent domain on her behalf, they literally had to build a massive towering commercial complex completely wrapping around her tiny house.
It looks ridiculous, but it is deeply beautiful. It is a visual monument to a single individual saying, no, this is mine. I do not care about your progress.
Exactly.
But with data centers and AI infrastructure, that individual agency is being stripped away by the alliance of state and corporate power.
And this alliance, this corporatocracy, isn't just an accidental byproduct of rapid technological growth. The manifestos and essays in our stack show that this corporate domination is a deliberate, highly articulated philosophical goal of the tech oligarchy. I want to look closely at Palantir.
Okay, for those who might not be familiar, Palantir is a massive data analytics and surveillance company. They're not making consumer apps. They are deeply embedded in the absolute highest levels of the U.S. military, ICE, Homeland Security, and global intelligence agencies. They build the software that tracks everything.
Right. Their CEO, Alex Karp, recently put out what essentially amounts to a corporate manifesto, and it is chilling in its bluntness. He does not hide his intentions.
What does he say?
He actively argues that tech billionaires and corporate engineers should have significantly more influence over how society is run. He explicitly states that they should operate without any public scrutiny, arguing that democratic oversight, congressional hearings, and public debate are just bureaucratic friction that slows down their vital work.
He believes the public is too ignorant to understand what needs to be done. And it gets crazier. In the same breath, he advocates for mandatory military service for everyday citizens and pushes for the U.S. to aggressively engage in a three-front war against China, Russia, and Iran.
Which is staggering when you remember that this is coming from a CEO whose company holds billions of dollars in military contracts. The conflict of interest is so massive it generates its own gravity.
And if you look at Palantir's co-founder, Peter Thiel, the vision gets even darker and more explicitly anti-democratic. We have a 2009 essay Thiel wrote for Cato Unbound, and he doesn't mince words. He explicitly wrote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible."
Just let the weight of that sentence sink in. The primary architect of the systems that track our global data, the man who built the surveillance architecture of the 21st century, fundamentally does not believe in democracy.
Right.
He views the voting public as a threat to his definition of freedom, which is essentially the freedom of capital and technology to operate without limits.
Thiel is also a massive financial proponent of radical transhumanism. This isn't just about making better prosthetics. This is a philosophical desire to escape the biological limits of humanity.
Yeah, uploading the mind.
He wants to eventually upload human consciousness digitally to achieve a sort of technological immortality. He is actively funding brain-computer interface companies and life extension research. He views the human body, and by extension the human community, as a fragile, obsolete system that needs to be transcended.
And he isn't just sitting in a lab writing essays. On the political front, he has been a massive force. He was the primary financial backer maneuvering J.D. Vance into the political spotlight and ultimately into the vice presidency. He is actively installing hardware into the political system to ensure his technological goals face zero resistance.
So you have a tech oligarchy that wants total control, believes democracy is obsolete, desires to transcend humanity itself, and requires a physical infrastructure that consumes massive civilization-level resources.
It is a lot to take in.
The environmental toll of this mega machine is already devastating. Just look at the examples popping up everywhere. Elon Musk's XAI company in Memphis was recently caught using illegal gas turbines because their new supercomputer drew so much power it threatened to crash the local grid.
Right.
In Fayetteville, Georgia, an entire community suddenly lost their water pressure. Why? Because a massive, secretive data center was quietly siphoning millions of gallons of water just to cool its server racks. And you have Kevin O'Leary pushing a proposed $100 billion data centers project in Utah that experts say will use twice the power of the entire state.
If we pull back and look at the whole board, the synthesis is undeniable. We are watching the United States actively regress into a high-tech feudal corporatocracy.
Yeah.
We have mega companies wielding the terrifying power of government to seize land and resources for private profit and transhumanist goals, completely bypassing any democratic checks, balances, or public consent.
And the pressure of this corporatocracy is quite literally fracturing our political and cultural systems. The old alliances are breaking down. Let's look at how this tension is splitting modern economics, specifically on the political right.
There is a deep analysis in our stack regarding a movement called Restore Britain, which serves as a perfect microcosm for a massive emerging schism in conservative thought globally.
Okay, let's break that down.
For decades, the right was relatively united around a fusion of free market capitalism and social conservatism, but that fusion is collapsing.
Right. On one side of this new schism, you have the traditional nationalists. These are people who favor a paternal, protective state. They believe the primary job of the government is to defend the local community, protect the national culture, and maintain strong, secure borders.
On the exact opposite side, you have the market libertarians, the Thatcherites, or the Reaganites. Their ultimate value is total free market Anglo-American liberty. They want zero regulation, free trade, and the absolute unhindered movement of capital.
And the core philosophical contradiction that is finally tearing them apart is this. Can you actually preserve a nation, a specific local culture, and strong borders using global capitalism?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because global capitalism is an economic system that inherently and ruthlessly dissolves borders in favor of cheap labor flows and atomized global consumerism.
The traditionalist critique of the free market, which is gaining massive traction, is that unchecked capitalism inevitably leads to the total domination of what they call the merchant class.
The merchant class, yeah.
In the 19th century, maybe the merchant was just a local factory owner who still went to your church and cared about the town. Today, the merchant is the Amazon or Monsanto mega monopoly, a stateless entity fueled by AI and global finance algorithms that has zero loyalty to any geographic location.
The traditionalists argue that this system actively destroys transcendent meaning. It replaces faith, family, and national duty with pure material consumption. To the global market, you are no longer a citizen with a rich history and obligations to your neighbors. You are just a frictionless economic unit.
Just a data point.
Exactly. You are a data point that either produces labor or consumes products. The market doesn't care about your community's continuity. It only cares about what is profitable in the next quarter.
And this hyper-focus on algorithmic efficiency and extraction is radically altering the microcosm of corporate culture itself. We are seeing a violent backlash against the human element within the workplace.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating viral stories in our stack. Ryan Breslow, the 31-year-old CEO of a fintech company called Bolt, recently made massive headlines for a ruthless corporate maneuver. He fired his entire HR department, everyone.
Just cleaned house.
And it is crucial to note the demographic context here. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data cited in the analysis, human resources is an overwhelmingly female-dominated field, hovering around 80%.
Breslow didn't just quietly lay them off, he made a highly public spectacle of it. He explicitly stated that the HR team was essentially a parasitic entity. He claimed they were creating problems that didn't exist, fostering a culture of entitlement, policing language, and complaining constantly instead of building the product. And his most controversial claim was that the moment he fired them, all the internal drama instantly disappeared, and the company began moving at lightning speed.
This story is acting as a massive lightning rod because it perfectly illustrates a violent whiplash in modern workplace culture. Think about your own office right now, or the culture we have been sold for the last 5 years. We have all seen these viral day in the life of a tech worker videos on TikTok.
Oh, you know exactly the ones. An employee shows up at the office at 11 a.m., grabs a free artisanal matcha latte from the barista, sits in a massage chair for 20 minutes, plays ping pong with a coworker, takes a nap in a designated pod to regulate their nervous system.
Writes maybe 3 lines of code, and goes home with a $150,000 base salary.
Right. Breslow's move represents the aggressive, almost brutal backlash against that era. He reinstated what he calls a gritty startup culture. He completely eliminated the 4-day work weeks, he stripped away the unlimited PTO, and he demanded hard, measurable output.
He wants people working.
Yes. His argument is that the corporate environment had grown entirely too comfortable, entitled, and detached from the actual brutal reality of survival in a competitive market.
Now, to look at the broader societal shift this points to, the analysts connect Breslow's actions to a deeply concerning demographic trend regarding men in the workforce. They reference a massive piece of investigative journalism by NPR about the missing men of America's marriage market.
The data here is stark. Women now hold roughly 60% of all college degrees and are consistently out-earning men in almost every major urban corporate environment.
The cultural argument presented by the critics is that this has led to a massive structural shortage of eligible men in the marriage market, at least from a traditional earning perspective.
Okay, so how does this connect to corporate culture?
The analysis suggests that the modern corporate structure has essentially evolved into a system of highly paid stipend jobs. These are roles heavily focused on administration, compliance, diversity management, and HR, rather than the hard, tangible production of goods or code.
Right. The argument is that this highly managed, hyper-administrative, emotionally regulated corporate culture is actively alienating men, driving them away from corporate participation entirely because the environment feels completely hostile to traditional male modes of working and risk-taking.
Whether you agree with that assessment or not, the friction between human nature and these massive artificially managed corporate systems is reaching a boiling point. People are checking out.
Yeah, they really are.
And it is not just happening in the boardroom. This abdication of reality has completely infiltrated our digital culture, our entertainment, and even the highest levels of global religion. Let's talk about how the mega machine subverts our culture, starting with the internet. Because your perception of reality, what you think the public consensus is being entirely warped by demographic shifts that most people are completely blind to.
We have to look at the global data. 10 years ago, if you looked at the top internet-using countries in the world, the platforms were utterly dominated by Western populations. The US, the UK, Germany, France. The culture of the internet was Western culture.
Right.
Today, the demographic map has completely flipped. The top 10 internet populations are now dominated by India, Indonesia, Brazil, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
The United States is the only Western nation left in the top 10. And it is barely holding on.
What is fascinating and terrifying about this is how it silently dictates our domestic political discourse through a psychological mechanism called audience capture.
Explain audience capture for us.
Think about how an influencer or a content creator operates. They sit in a room, they speak into a camera, and they look at a dashboard of metrics. They are driven entirely by algorithmic engagement. The algorithm rewards retention and reaction.
So if your audience is increasingly located in the developing world because of these massive demographic shifts, the algorithm will ruthlessly condition you to speak to their interests, their grievances, and their values, not Western interests.
Exactly. The creator becomes a puppet of their own audience. The analysts point to massive influencers to illustrate this. Look at Andrew Tate. His short-form videos aren't just going viral in Ohio. They heavily target and resonate with disaffected youth in developing nations.
Or look at Tucker Carlson. The critics note instances where Carlson has actively pandered to foreign demographics, literally claiming on air that he feels he has more in common with a Pakistani cab driver than with a Western liberal living in his own country.
It is incredible. These influencers, unconsciously or sometimes very consciously, adopt the values of these massive foreign demographics because that is where the clicks, the money, and the algorithmic juice are coming from.
It changes everything.
The analysts argue this mechanism explains massive, seemingly inexplicable shifts in domestic politics. It explains why the Western left suddenly abandoned local domestic issues like environmentalism to focus intensely on global conflicts in the Middle East, or why massive factions of the populist right have suddenly adopted staunchly anti-war, anti-interventionist stances that perfectly align with foreign state interests.
They aren't responding to domestic voters, they are responding to global algorithms. And it is all artificially amplified by the bot illusion. The investigations detail how heavy botting on platforms like Twitch and X creates a fake manufactured consensus.
This is the craziest part.
An American creator sits in their bedroom in Texas, looks at their massive view count, reads the chat, and assumes they are speaking to a massive domestic American audience that completely agrees with their radical new take, when in reality they're catering to a bot-farmed audience run out of a warehouse overseas designed to amplify division.
Right.
The public square you think you are participating in is a complete algorithmic illusion. You are arguing with a ghost.
And this idea of invisible, unaccountable influence directing society from behind the curtain isn't a new phenomenon created by the internet. It has just changed mediums. The internet democratized the subversion, but historically, this was the domain of the elite.
Let's get into the Hollywood connection.
Right. Our sources connect this directly to Hollywood, specifically referencing the cultural legacy of Stanley Kubrick's final, highly controversial film, Eyes Wide Shut.
This is a wild, incredibly dark connection. To impartially explain the claim being made here, the analysts argue that Kubrick's film, which famously depicts a secret, highly exclusive society of ultra-wealthy New York elites engaging in masked occult sex rituals, was not just a piece of surreal erotic fiction.
No, they think it was real.
They argue it is an incredibly accurate, heavily researched depiction of how elite compromise actually functions in the real world.
They point to the subsequent release of the Jeffrey Epstein files and historical, documented events like the bizarre Rothschild surrealist mask balls of the 1970s as real-world proof of the film's thesis.
Kubrick was famous for his obsessive, meticulous research.
Yes. The film shows how deviant sexuality, trauma, and shared guilt are used as currency to solidify power, ensure absolute loyalty, and maintain silence among the ruling class. If everyone in the room is compromised, no one can whistleblow.
The cultural critics frame this as a form of predictive programming, or point to the long history of Hollywood functioning essentially as an intelligence arm. They note the heavily documented history of A-list actors, directors, and cultural icons, people like Julia Child, Marlene Dietrich, and Cary Grant, who literally worked as spies and operatives for the OSS and the CIA during and after World War II. Hollywood has always been intertwined with state power.
The ultimate analysis suggests that Kubrick, who died mysteriously of a heart attack just days after submitting his final, unalterable edit of the film to the studio, was attempting to expose a ruling class that operates entirely without a moral compass.
He was showing us a system that rules through hidden, vicious compromise while presenting a sanitized, philanthropic face to the public.
So the algorithms subvert our discourse from the bottom up, the elites subvert our legal and moral structures from the top down, and according to the final pieces in our stack, this infiltration is even reaching the highest, most ancient levels of global religion. Let's look at the Vatican.
The Catholic Church, a 2,000-year-old institution built on the concept of eternal truth, is currently undergoing a massive years-long structural process called the Synod on Synodality. The Vatican recently released working documents for an implementation phase that will run through 2028.
To impartially report on the specific, massive controversy raging inside the church over this, the critics highlight a document known as Study Group 9.
What does it say?
The Vatican's documents explicitly instruct the church hierarchy to integrate and deeply listen to the reality of lived experiences, with specific emphasis on marginalized and LGBTQ groups, heavily referencing the outreach methods of highly controversial figures like Father James Martin.
The theological shift here is profound, and it mirrors everything else we have talked about today. Historically, the church operates on immutable, absolute truth, divine revelation that comes from God, and does not change based on human opinion, the era, or popular consensus. But the critics argue that by elevating subjective lived experiences to the level where it shapes theology and pastoral practice, the institution is fundamentally shifting its foundation.
Think of it like a ship. Historically, the doctrine of the church was an anchor. The waters of culture could rage and storm, the opinions of the crowd could shift, but the anchor held the ship in one absolute place.
That makes sense.
What the critics are arguing is that the Vatican is trying to pull up the anchor and replace it with a sail, trying to capture the wind of modern cultural consensus to propel the church forward.
And traditionalists point out that this has been tried before. The expert analysis ties this directly back to Pope St. Pius X in the early 20th century, who fiercely condemned a philosophical movement called vital immanence in his encyclicals against modernism.
Right.
Explain vital immanence in plain English for us, because it sounds like dense theology, but it is actually the core of the modern worldview.
Vital immanence is essentially the idea that religious truth doesn't come down from heaven, it bubbles up from within. It is the belief that divine truth is found in the subjective experiences, feelings, and collective desires of the crowd.
Okay, I see.
Pius X warned that if you adopt this, you destroy religion, because truth just becomes whatever the mob currently wants. By prioritizing the emerging issues of the modern crowd, the argument is that the Vatican is allowing popular culture to subvert absolute doctrine.
It is the exact same pattern. Whether it is AI replacing human academic judgment, algorithms replacing domestic political discourse, or subjective lived experience replacing immutable doctrine, the mega machine wants to strip away objective truth and human agency. It wants to leave us floating in a sea of subjective, highly manipulable chaos.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. How do we fight back? How do we reclaim meaning, tradition, and mercy in the face of a system that wants to turn us into compliant data points?
We have to start by defining what we are actually trying to save. When we talk about fighting the machine, we are really talking about preserving the Western tradition. But what does that actually mean? The word tradition itself is so vital. It comes from the Latin traditio, which literally translates to the act of handing over a baton in a relay race.
But here is the catch. To hand over a baton, you need two people. You need an older generation actively, intentionally reaching out to pass the hard-won knowledge of the past, and you critically need a younger generation willing to reach back and receive it. It requires effort. It requires agency.
And the historians point out that building a civilization that can pass that baton requires two fundamental technologies. First, you need stability, usually agricultural and political stability. A nomadic tribe fighting for survival every day can't build a cathedral. You have to be sedentary enough to build something lasting.
Right, you need roots.
Second, you need writing. Writing is the ultimate time travel technology. It allows the civilization to communicate its deepest values across centuries to its future self.
And the defining spark of the Western tradition, the massive leap of reason that separates us from pure myth, happened in ancient Greece. The historical analysis pinpoints a specific man, Thales of Miletus.
Thales.
He was a philosopher who successfully predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BC, right in the middle of a war between the Medes and the Lydians.
Why is predicting an eclipse so monumental?
Because it was the exact moment humans realized the universe is not just chaotic divine whim. Before Thales, if the sky went dark, you assumed the gods were angry and you needed to sacrifice a goat. Thales proved that the universe runs on rational, discoverable, mathematical principles. It is a clockwork that human reason can actually understand.
It is the discovery of the concept of logos versus chaos. Logos, which is a Greek concept later adopted by Christianity in the Gospel of John, represents order, reason, the word, and divine logic. The fundamental thesis of the West is that true liberty requires law and order. You can only be free within a structured reality.
But the sources argue that the modern mega machine is pushing a dark logic. A chaotic scientism that says reality is completely subjective.
Like creating your own truth.
Exactly. The machine tells you that you can identify as whatever you want. You can create your own reality. You can alter your biology. You can rewrite truth. But limitless freedom is actually a prison. True freedom is rooted in aligning your limited human will with an objective good.
There is a fantastic personal anecdote in the materials about this exact realization. One of the writers tells a story about driving a beat-up 1966 International Harvester truck down to Austin, Texas, right before Y2K.
Oh, I loved this part.
It was a time of massive cultural chaos. Everyone thought the computer systems were going to crash, the grid was going to fail, and society was going to end.
Oh.
And Austin was just a wild, lawless party. Complete, limitless freedom.
And in the midst of that absolute chaotic freedom, he found himself deeply depressed. He ended up being drawn to a strict, traditional, highly structured religious community.
Right, he needed structure.
He realized, in the face of Y2K, that true meaning isn't found in limitless, chaotic partying. It is found in committing to a structured, transcendent purpose. You have to choose a master, or the machine will choose one for you.
And if logos is the structure of the universe, the highest, most powerful expression of human agency within that structure is mercy. Which brings us to our final and most profound source, the moral arc of Gollum.
Yes. If you want the ultimate narrative counter-argument to the ruthless efficiency of the mega machine, you look to J.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings.
Now, if you only watch the Peter Jackson movies, you remember the ending at Mount Doom a certain way. Frodo finally succumbs to the ring. He claims it for himself. Gollum jumps on him, bites his finger off, and they physically wrestle on the edge of the cliff until they both fall over. It is a violent physical struggle for power.
But that is not what happens in the book.
No. In Tolkien's original text, Gollum bites the finger off, reclaims his precious, and dances with maniacal blind joy. And as he's dancing, he simply trips. He steps over the edge by accident and falls into the fire. It's an act of cosmic providence, not physical dominance.
But why did Tolkien, who spent decades constructing this mythos, write the climax of the entire epic as an accident?
It seems anticlimactic, right?
The literary analysis points to a specific letter Tolkien wrote, letter 96, where he explains the most tragic, pivotal moment of the entire story. And it doesn't happen at Mount Doom. It happens much earlier, on the dark, treacherous stairs of Cirith Ungol.
Frodo and Sam are exhausted, sleeping on the cold stone. Gollum, who has been plotting to betray them to the spider Shelob, creeps up. He looks at Frodo sleeping peacefully. And Tolkien writes that for a brief, fleeting moment, the malice completely leaves him. He looks like an old, weary, starving hobbit.
He reaches out a trembling hand and gently touches Frodo's knee.
He is on the absolute verge of repentance. He is about to choose the good.
But Sam wakes up. He sees Gollum touching his master, and he reacts with completely understandable but ruthless suspicion. He harshly accuses Gollum of sneaking.
Right, he calls him a sneak.
And Tolkien writes that single, rough, merciless word snaps Gollum instantly back into his malicious alter ego. The window for repentance slams shut, guaranteeing his future betrayal.
Tolkien was later asked by a fan, what would have happened if Sam had managed to show mercy and understanding in that exact moment? Tolkien wrote that Gollum was too far gone, too deeply corrupted, to resist the ring entirely. He still would have attacked Frodo at Mount Doom and taken it.
But having been shown love and mercy by Sam on the stairs, Gollum's heart would have changed.
Yes, he would have taken the ring and then voluntarily cast himself into the fire to save Frodo.
It is breathtaking. The ultimate takeaway from Tolkien is that evil, by its very nature, is inherently self-defeating. Sauron's greatest weakness, his fatal flaw that led to his destruction, was his sheer inability to even imagine that someone would want to destroy the Ring of Power rather than wield it. The machine cannot compute mercy.
Providence favors mercy. The fate of Middle-earth didn't come down to massive armies clashing at the Black Gate. The armies were just a distraction. The fate of the world came down to a chain of small, intensely personal, merciful decisions. Bilbo sparing Gollum's life in the goblin tunnels when he had the chance to strike. Frodo pitying him and trusting him.
Every single small assertion of human morality, every choice to not be a ruthless machine, is a massive inflection point in the cosmic drama.
Which brings us directly to you, the listener, and the call to action for today, because this is a deep dive on the Morning Roundup. We do not just dump a mountain of terrifying philosophical information on you and leave you to despair. We give you the tools to act. The mega machines, the AI networks, the corporatocracies tearing down neighborhoods, the algorithms warping your reality. They want to strip away your judgment.
They really do.
They want to turn you into a passive, terrified consumer of aesthetic slop. Your human agency, grounded in tradition, reason, and mercy, is the absolute only antidote.
So here is your actionable homework for today. We want you to do 3 things. Number 1, stop outsourcing your judgment. Reclaim the classical concept of leisure. I want you to pick up a physical, challenging book this week, not an audiobook, not a summary, and actually wrestle with it. Build your build'em.
Number 2, look closely at your local civic developments. Go to a city council meeting. Who is buying up land in your county? Are data centers quietly seizing resources under the guise of economic progress? Pay attention to where you live.
And number 3, ruthlessly curate your digital feeds. Strip away the bot-driven outrage designed for foreign demographics and start focusing your time on building real, physical, highly local human communities.
I'm going to push your buttons a bit here because someone has to. You think your worldview is your own.
Right.
You think your political opinions are uniquely yours. Really look at your media consumption. Have you ever found yourself scrolling for an hour entirely numb? Are you just blindly repeating the talking points fed to you by foreign bot farms and algorithms designed to keep you angry?
It happens to all of us.
Or are you actively engaging with the great traditions and complex truths of the past? Do not let the machine think for you.
As always, we highly encourage you to check the sources linked below. Do not just take our word for any of this. Go read the Palantir Manifesto. Go read the Supreme Court dissent in the Kelo case. Read Tolkien's letters. Investigate these tectonic shifts for yourself.
And please, if you found value in this deep dive, if it challenged you or gave you a new framework to see the world, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this show with someone who needs to hear it. Is the only way we beat the algorithms.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, specifically regarding the AI models we talked about. There is a phenomenon in computer science right now called model collapse. It happens when an AI is fed too much data that was generated by other AIs rather than human beings. The model essentially starts eating its own tail. The language fractures, the logic degrades, and the entire system rapidly collapses into gibberish. The machine needs constant, fresh human creativity to survive, but it is simultaneously designed to replace human creativity. When that massive automated system inevitably begins to choke on its own synthetic exhaust, what happens to the society that forgot how to think without it? Are you actively building a local lifeboat of real skills, analog knowledge, and true physical community? Or are you just a passive passenger on a digital ship that has convinced itself it cannot sink?
See you tomorrow.